Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we're going to be servicing the rear shock on the Santa Cruz Hightower. I want to say last week or maybe 2 weeks ago I went ahead and I serviced the RockShox Yari up front, and I went ahead and I painted the fork too, and it actually came out pretty nice. But the biggest thing was the fork rode so much differently that I decided to service the Marzocchi on my hardtail back there, the Vitas, and it changed the way that bike rode as well. I was getting this weird clicking, and it turned out the thing only had maybe 2.5 mils of oil on each side of the leg. It's supposed to have 10 mils. And interestingly enough, that Marzocchi doesn't have oil rings, the foam rings. So I went ahead and I ordered some foam rings and I put them in there, and I serviced it, and I cleaned the air chamber and the air shaft and all that stuff, and I put the right amount of oil that goes in there. And it's pretty smooth and it rides really nice. So I mentioned in our last video with the Industry 9 wheel that we're taking a ride up to Georgia to Jared's place. So I want to go ahead and service this fork. I did order a rebuild kit or a service kit for 50-hour service kit from Worldwide Cyclery, and it just came in today. So I'm not going to go step by step on how to take the shock off. There's a lot of videos and different bikes on how to do that. The one thing I'll say is make sure when you take out some of the air on this rear shock, you go through your suspension a little bit to equalize the pressure in the rear shock until you get to 0. And then I'll take it off and I'll put it on the workbench, and we'll go ahead and get started with a rebuild. We have the rear shock off the bike, and I went ahead and I took this shock into the garage and I put it on the vise, and put it in the vise with this side into the vise, and I twisted off the air can already just to make the job easier. And you know, we'll unscrew the air can and that'll get us going. But I'm gonna go over the kit here. This is the Fox kit, the 803-00142, and this has all of your O-rings, your plastic seals that you need, and the Fox float fluid that we're gonna use as well. There's 5 mils in here, and we're gonna go ahead and set this aside, and we'll go ahead and put all these rings where they need to be, and we'll get back here and open this thing up. So I went ahead and I somewhat organized everything so it's easier to find and have a clean work area. So we have our set of plastic bushings, I guess it would be, and our one seal. We have a second seal with our 2 split rings here that we'll put on, and I'll show you where those go when we open this thing up. We have our lower seal, dust seal, that we'll put in, and we'll go ahead and get started. And I unscrewed this earlier, like I said. We're gonna go ahead and pull the air can off. Just always make sure that all the air pressure's out of this thing. Triple check it if you need to. We'll start off by taking our O-ring off. You know, set that to the side with all the old parts, and we'll pull the air can off. It's got a little bit of resistance. It might pop when you pull it out. There you go. And here's our air can. So our first seal, or second seal, whichever way you decide to do this, will be your dust seal is going to be here. We'll pull that out. And then you've got plastic ring here that sandwiches in the rubber ring, and then another plastic ring. And that's what these guys look like right here. Okay, so this is the order that they will go on. If I can get it together here. That's what they'll look like when you put them on. Okay, and it's the same thing with the one on the actual, I guess the shock, I don't know, the shaft. These are split, and they're split right there, and you can kind of see where that splits off a little bit maybe. The biggest key when you do any of this is just make sure, if you're using a metal pick, don't dig into the plastic to get it in, because you might actually nick the metal, and that can cause a lot of issues. You know, if you've got a steady hand, you can use it, but just be aware that scratching this will mess up your shock or cause some issues down the road. So we'll go ahead and pull this here ring out first, and you can see I'm just putting a little bit of pressure on there, not much, and I'm gonna slide my finger in there to get it out. They are kind of slippery, but you see how they come apart. Just toss that to the side. Come over here and do the other one. This one you can dig out with your finger. We'll put that aside. And then your O-ring, they're kind of slippery. Take these out. Guess you could take these little bump stops out to make things easier. We'll set these aside as well. But there you go, we got these out. Alright, we'll take a little bit of our alcohol and we'll clean all this stuff out real nice. And if you want to look at your volume spacers, we have them right in here as well. And these little guys will pop out just by pushing them in or pulling them out. This one I'm not going to mess with because I don't have any other volume spacers to put in there and don't really have an issue with botting them out quite yet, so we're going to leave that alone. But we're going to go ahead and give it a once over with some alcohol, make sure this is all nice and clean, and then we'll get moving to the air can side and the install of these rings. Okay, so we've got this all cleaned up. I took the air spacer out just so, or volume reducer, so we can go ahead and clean it and get all that gunk that was in there. It wasn't too bad. It was a little dirty, but not as bad as it probably could have been for not knowing how long it's been since it's been serviced. But this is kind of what came out of there. Kind of old oil and dirt, and it's kind of to be expected for riding this thing and not really knowing when it was serviced. There's another seal in here that does have to be replaced, and we'll go ahead and do that now since that volume reducer's out. And it's the actual gasket that goes to the cap here. And we're gonna use a fine pick here to gently get that out. And went ahead and there you go, it's coming out. And I like to work on one thing at a time. I don't like to jump around and do everything all at once, so we'll go ahead and match this up with our new seal, O-ring, whatever everyone wants to call it. And we'll go ahead and place it in here exactly where it was in the groove that it belongs in. Sometimes it can be a bit of a pain. Trying to find it as my light source isn't that great. Alright, and that's in there. We'll go ahead and get started with these seals here. Now that we have that O-ring on the top of the cover here, we'll go ahead and put our volume reducer in. And you just have to find the right spot and just pop it in there. There we go, we're all set, that's popped in there. Okay. And we'll go ahead and begin putting our white seals on the actual shock here. So what we're gonna do is we'll take our first one, and you can see these are split just like that. So it makes it a little easier to get on. So we'll go ahead and get our first one on. Okay, and then we'll get our next seal, the rubber seal, and we'll put that on next. Just like that. We'll take our bottom split seal. You can see the difference here. You can't mess this up. They're different diameters. There's no way you can fit that on there. So we'll go here and we'll put that on. And that's it. Now when we're done, we'll go ahead and put a coat of the float fluid on here. Some people use the Slick Honey, whatever you got. And we'll set this aside and we'll get started with the air can. Alright, now we'll move on to the air can. So we're gonna go ahead and start with the dust seal, and in the dust seal you can see a little lip that goes between the aluminum and the actual seal, and I like to take a pick and just get in there and gently pry upwards, and you'll see this guy just pop right out of there. Sometimes it takes a little bit of work. There you go. Didn't score anything, looks good. If you have plastic tools, use plastic tools so you don't scratch anything if you're nervous about that. Like to live life on the edge. So we'll throw this stuff over here on the side, and we'll go ahead and get these plastic rings. Now these plastic rings can be kind of a bear to get out, so just take your time, be patient, don't get upset with them. I'll start off with a rubber seal. Here's the old rubber seal, and we'll go ahead and get these guys out. These are a little bit tough to get out. We'll go ahead and get these out. There's one. Gentle hand, remember guys. And there it goes. That's two. So, got both rings out. We're gonna do a little speed lapse of us cleaning this real quick. We'll inspect it, make sure there are no gouges, just to make sure, and then we'll reassemble everything. This thing cleaned up pretty good. The biggest thing is the detail in these things, is make sure you got everything cleaned up real nice, and taking the time to take it off and do a service right, make sure you do it 100%. Don't just half-ass it with a dirty shock and throw it back together, unless you have to and you're in a trail. But if you're at home and you've got the time, do a good job. But we'll go ahead and get started with the seals here. Now these can be a pain in the ass from what I've heard. They can be a little difficult to fit in, but let's see how we can do. So we're gonna take this little white seal and we're gonna somewhat form it in here so it could fit into that little groove. If you're blessed with small fingers, this will be easy for you. If you're not, then you'll have to figure it out. But there's that first ring. Okay, the challenge becomes when you put in the second white ring. We're gonna go ahead and put our rubber seal in. Okay, there's our rubber seal. And our last but not least, this guy here. This one's gonna be difficult. There you go. So my technique is I put one finger here and I kind of try to fit the rest of it into the groove and feed it in there the best that I can. And you see there, we've got that. It's got that little deformation there. Just pop it in, and it's in. Just feel it around with your finger, make sure everything's all set in place. And you can see they go right back into their normal position once you rub them around there. Okay. Our next step is we'll pop in our new dust seal. Compare the two because it looked a little bigger, but it's got its own little groove. You just go ahead and feed it into its own groove. And once you fit it in, it looks nice and straight. If you don't have it in straight, it'll have like a crinkle to it. Just telling you, you gotta go back and redo it. And here are all of our old seals. So we're gonna go ahead and put everything back together here. I'll go grab some of the slick honey and we'll get started on the assembly of the air can. Alright, so we're gonna go ahead and install this on the air can. I took a little bit of slick honey and I already installed some slick honey on the actual the top seal here, and some on our lower here, our lower seals. And I went ahead and I put 2.5 milliliters of the slick honey, I'm sorry, the float fluid that I put in a syringe, and we'll just go ahead and install this here. There you go. We'll just pop it on there. It is going to be kind of tough to get that on there. You got to put it on there with a little bit of force. Now, not too much force. If it's too much, obviously don't jam it in there, but it has a little bit of resistance. We'll take a reservoir 2.5 mils of the float fluid and we're going to stick it in the top of the air can now. And that's what lubricates all these seals when it's moving up and down through its travel. And we'll go ahead and close her up. It's gonna have a little bit of pressure, so it might be a little tough to get on. Yeah, it looks like I'm gonna have to use the vise to get this on here. So I'll be right back and I'll show you guys what it looks like when it's completely tightened up. Okay, we're back from the vise and we went ahead and we screwed on the air can. It's kind of difficult because of the pressure built in the lower of this air chamber. When you put the shaft in, it puts a lot of air resistance in there, and it's not till you get to these dimples when you're on the vise, when you give it some force, that it'll actually equalize and it gives you some room to actually tighten it up. So you know, if you're a real strong person, you can probably compress it with your hands. Guess I'm not that strong, so I use the vise and it seemed to help out. We're gonna go ahead and clean up these bushings here a little bit, and we'll put a little bit of grease on them and we'll slide them back on the bike. Keep in mind that these little bushings have O-rings as well, right on the inside right here. And it might vary with your bike, but with the Santa Cruz Hightower, you've got these little rings here. As you can see, that's what they look like, so don't lose those. And I'm gonna use a little bit of the PPL-1 on this, just a light smear. You don't have to go crazy with these things. You don't want a bunch of crap collecting on this. Just enough to avoid any type of corrosion or anything seizing up. So we'll put it here, nice and smooth. We'll put in our other ring, O-ring. And a little plastic cap. And this is pretty much done and ready to go back on the bike. Little note before we move on here, which I forgot to mention. Your sag ring will have to go back on, and they do include a sag ring in here, and we'll just slide that on real quick. And now we're ready for install on the bike. You know, make this video sometimes and you seem to forget little things, you gotta put them back in. So there's your sag ring, guys. If you thought I missed it, I didn't. We'll go ahead and get it on the bike. I'm not really gonna do a video on me installing it. Like I said, every bike is different, so just check with your manufacturer. And some of my videos, I know I've tightened a lot of things down without an actual torque wrench, and that's usually on aluminum things that I know I'm not gonna strip from feel of you know, working on cars and working on bikes and stuff. You kind of get a feel for how tight things are. On carbon, on the other hand, do not take that risk. Use a torque wrench. Use a torque wrench for the bolt up here that goes into the carbon. Use anything that has to do with carbon, use a torque wrench, please. You don't want to ruin your frame or your handlebars or anything like that. So let's go ahead and get this on. And that concludes this video of the 50-hour service on the rear shock, specifically the Fox Dps. You know, follow your recommendations every 50 hours. You'll get that live smooth feeling suspension again. And I can tell you from riding the other two forks, the Marzocchi and the Yari, with a little bit of old oil, it makes a huge difference. One thing I didn't mention before is before you take your air out, record what your air settings are, record what your rebound settings are. If you have compression settings, do that as well, because you don't want to be messing around with that, trying to figure out where you were at before. I did go ahead and tighten these bolts to the 16 Newton meters on the carbon with a torque wrench. Same thing on the back here. But check with your manufacturer, it could be different. That's why I don't really like doing the install and removal of these things on here, because it's not really relevant. Everyone's got different systems. But if you have any questions, concerns, or any suggestions on how to make the videos better, leave them in the comments, or send me a friendly message on Instagram, Ride Dirty MTV, and I'll be happy to chat with you guys and see what we could do better. But I hope you guys have a great weekend. I hope you get out and ride, and I'll see you guys later.